The bell rang, sharp and hollow, echoing through the wide hallways of Summit Ridge High. Students poured out of classrooms like rushing water, the noise of chatter and laughter filling the air. Jasmine Whitfield clutched her backpack strapped tighter, her steps measured, her gaze low. She had learned long ago that moving often meant starting over again and again, always the outsider, always the new face that drew whispers. 3 weeks in Idaho, and it already felt the same. Summit Ridge was small, the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business before it made the paper. Here, last names carried weight. Here, strangers weren't welcome. They were judged, dissected, and labeled before they even had a chance to speak. Jasmine knew it the moment she stepped into the building on her first day. The stairs followed her like shadows, eyes scanning the dark curls tied back neatly, her steady posture, the quiet confidence she tried so hard to fake. She had promised herself she would get through high school the same way she always did, blend in, keep her head down, avoid trouble. But trouble had a way of finding her. He noticed her before anyone else did. Trent Dawson, 17 years old, quarterback, golden boy of Summit Ridge High. He walked with the kind of confidence that didn't need to be earned, because in his mind, it was inherited. His father sat on the school board, his mother threw fundraisers that kept the town's wealthiest families close. Teachers smiled at him a little too long. Students moved aside when he walked down the hall. Trent didn't just have power. He had the luxury of knowing he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. And now, his eyes were locked on Jasmine Whitfield. It began with the smallest things, the kind most students wouldn't even notice. A whisper when she passed, a nudge to his friends with a smirk curling his lips. The kind of laugh that wasn't loud enough to call out, but sharp enough to pierce. Jasmine heard it. She always heard it. Still, she told herself to keep walking. Ignore him. Don't give him what he wants. On her third day, it shifted. English class. Mr. Holloway droned on about the Great Gatsby, chalk squeaking against the blackboard. Jasmine's pen scratched across her notebook, each word a shield between her and the room. Then it came, a whisper, close, deliberate. "Hey, new girl." She froze but didn't look up. "I'm talking to you, Whitfield." Her grip tightened on the pen. She kept writing. Trent leaned back in his chair, stretching like he owned the air itself. Funny how some people show up where they don't belong. A few kids snickered. Jasmine forced her breath to stay even. Her silence was her armor, and she refused to let him strip it away. "Maybe you're just lost," he added, his voice dripping with false innocence. "A school like this, with people like us, must feel weird, huh?" Jasmine's chest tightened, but her face remained calm. She had seen boys like him before, in too many towns, too many schools, arrogant, reckless, always testing how far they could push, and she had seen what happened when you gave them the reaction they wanted. But Trent Dawson hated being ignored. He leaned closer, his words like knives slipped between the noise of turning pages. "Hey, Whitfield, you deaf? Or is it hard to hear over all that?" Before Jasmine could respond, Mr. Holloway's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Trent, do you have something to share with the class?" Trent leaned back instantly, his hands raised in mock surrender. "No, sir, just welcoming the new student." Laughter rippled quietly through the rows, and Mr. Holloway turned back to the board. But Trent didn't stop. He smiled at Jasmine, a grin filled with promise, the kind of promise that meant trouble. A note landed on her desk moments later, folded once, precise. She opened it. 4 words scrawled across the page. "Go back to where you came from." Her throat tightened. She folded the note slowly, tucking it into her bag. No reaction, no satisfaction for him, but her silence didn't mean surrender. Because what Trent Dawson didn't know, what no one at Summit Ridge knew yet, was that Jasmine Whitfield's father was not the kind of man you wanted to cross. And soon enough, Trent would find that out the hard way. The cafeteria at Summit Ridge buzzed with the restless energy of teenagers who knew exactly where they belonged. Every table was a kingdom, every seat a symbol. The athletes claimed the center, their laughter loud, their presence impossible to ignore. The drama kids crowded the far corner, always telling stories with hands that moved as quickly as their voices. The outcasts and loners scattered along the edges, clinging to trays like shields. Jasmine Whitfield stood at the entrance, tray in hand, scanning the room as if searching for an empty square of safety. Her stomach tightened. It was the same story, the same routine she had lived too many times before. New town, new school, new cafeteria politics. She inhaled slowly and decided to sit alone. Better the sting of solitude than the spectacle of rejection. She found a spot near the window, her back turned against the chaos. The Idaho sky stretched gray and endless outside, mountains looming far in the distance. She liked that, the silence of the view, the way the world looked bigger than this room full of judgment. She poked at her sandwich, telling herself she didn't care that no one was sitting with her. But of course someone noticed. Trent Dawson always noticed. He sat with his teammates in the center, his chair turned at an angle so he could survey the room like a king watching over his court. When his eyes caught Jasmine alone by the window, a slow smirk curled across his face. To him, she wasn't invisible. She was a challenge, a test of how much control he could assert. He stood, grabbing his soda can, and his friends immediately quieted, sensing something was about to happen. "Watch this," he muttered, striding across the cafeteria with the swagger of someone who had never been told no. Jasmine didn't look up when his shadow fell across her table. She knew it was him. She could feel the heat of attention shift, the whispers ripple outward like waves. She stayed calm, kept her eyes on the half-eaten sandwich in front of her. "Whitfield," Trent drawled, his voice carrying just enough to invite an audience. "You enjoying lunch in the land of the forgotten?" A few chuckles rose around them. Jasmine lifted her gaze slowly, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she said simply. "Fine?" he repeated, cocking his head. "That's it? No thanks for the welcome? No gee, Trent, it's nice of you to notice me?" She didn't blink. "I didn't ask you to." The boldness of her tone startled a few students close enough to hear. For a brief second, the smirk on Trent's face faltered. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tipped the soda can. A stream of dark liquid spilled across her tray, soaking her sandwich, dripping onto her jeans. Gasps and laughter exploded around them. Jasmine froze. The cold liquid seeped through the denim, stinging her skin, but she didn't flinch. Her throat burned, her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. She wanted to scream, wanted to shove the tray back into his chest, but she remembered the promise she had made to herself. Don't give him the satisfaction. Don't let him see you break. Trent leaned closer, his grin wicked. "Oops, guess you should have said thanks." The laughter grew louder, echoing through the cafeteria like applause. Jasmine stood slowly, lifting the dripping tray with steady hands. She walked past him without a word, every step deliberate, every breath sharp in her chest. She could hear the snickers, feel the stares burn against her back, but she didn't let her shoulders slump. She walked tall, even as humiliation threatened to crush her. In the hallway, out of sight, she set the tray down on a counter and pressed her palms against the cool metal surface. Her eyes stung, her body trembled, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not where he could win. Back inside the cafeteria, Trent returned to his table, basking in the laughter of his friends. But what no one saw, what even Trent didn't recognize, was the fire building quietly inside Jasmine Whitfield. Because humiliation wasn't defeat, not for her. She had lived through worse. She had endured towns that spat her family out like outsiders, schools that whispered behind her back, people who thought silence meant weakness. But silence could also mean strength. And one day soon, she promised herself, Trent Dawson would learn exactly what that meant. The next morning, sunlight slanted across the polished floors of Summit Ridge High, but for Jasmine Whitfield, the air felt heavier than usual. Whispers chased her down the hallway, little fragments of laughter that still carried the sting of yesterday's cafeteria humiliation. She kept her steps measured, her chin slightly lifted, as though daring herself to walk through the storm untouched. By third period, English class, she could feel it again, the weight of eyes on her back. She slipped into her seat near the window, pulled out her notebook, and let her pen hover above the page. If she focused on words, on ink-forming lines, maybe she could block out the world. But Trent Dawson never let his targets disappear. He lounged 2 rows back, his chair tipped dangerously on 2 legs, a pencil twirling between his fingers. His smirk hadn't faded since the cafeteria. If anything, it had sharpened. He wanted more. Yesterday had been fun, but it hadn't broken her. And that unsettled him more than he would admit. Mr. Holloway scribbled a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird on the board, his voice low and steady. "Remember, class, this novel isn't just about the trial. It's about courage in the face of cruelty." Jasmine copied the words, her handwriting neat, precise. Behind her, Trent's voice sliced through the silence, pitched just low enough to sound like a whisper, just loud enough for her to hear. "Careful, Whitfield. This book might hit too close to home, huh?" Her pen stilled for the briefest second, but she didn't turn. Trent leaned forward, his breath brushing the back of her neck. "Bet your dad couldn't save you yesterday. Guess he's not as important as you thought." Jasmine's chest tightened. For a moment, anger surged hot and sharp, but she swallowed it down. She had learned restraint from her father, years of watching him walk into rooms where people doubted him, watching him win with silence and patience instead of fury. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and kept writing. Her refusal to engage only fueled Trent's need to dominate. He flicked a small wad of paper onto her desk. When she ignored it, he flicked another, and another. The soft plops against her notebook drew giggles from the students nearby. Finally, Jasmine stopped writing. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a calm so steady it made him blink. "You're loud," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for the front row to hear. But loud doesn't mean strong. A hush fell for a moment. A few students stifled laughter, not at her, but at him. Trent's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. He opened his mouth to fire back, but Mr. Holloway's voice cut in. "Mr. Dawson, since you seem so eager to participate, why don't you read the next passage aloud?" Trent gritted his teeth, grabbed the book, and stumbled over the first few lines. His confidence cracked under the spotlight. Students chuckled quietly. For once, it wasn't Jasmine at the center of the joke. It was him. She turned back to her notebook, her lips pressed together in the faintest, most private smile. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something. And for the first time since she arrived in Summit Ridge, Jasmine felt a flicker of power. What Trent didn't know, what no one else in that classroom realized, was that this flicker would soon become a flame, because somewhere in the background of all this tension was a man no one dared to underestimate, Jasmine's father. And if Trent thought the cafeteria was the peak of his control, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. Monday morning came with a kind of tension that hung over Summit Ridge High like a storm cloud waiting to break. Students whispered before first bell, gossip moving faster than the morning announcements. Jasmine Whitfield walked through the doors with her usual quiet resolve, but even she could sense it. Something was different today. That difference arrived not with noise, but with presence. The front office door swung open, and Elliot Whitfield stepped inside. He wasn't just Jasmine's father. He was the newly appointed chief of police for Summit Ridge, a fact the town knew, but the students had not yet connected to the quiet girl sitting alone in the cafeteria. Elliot was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark uniform pressed sharp as glass, the silver badge catching the fluorescent lights. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much to be rattled by teenage games. Principal Warren rose from behind his desk with a nervous smile, smoothing his tie. "Chief Whitfield, I didn't expect you here this morning." Elliot's voice was steady, low, every syllable deliberate. "We need to talk about what's happening to my daughter." The words rolled through the office like thunder. Moments later, Jasmine was called down from her homeroom. When she entered, she froze. Her father stood tall at the center of the room, his presence commanding, his uniform drawing every eye. Across from him sat Darren and Lauren Dawson, Trent's parents. Darren's suit was expensive, his posture dripping with arrogance. Lauren crossed her arms, her eyes sharp and dismissive. Between them slouched Trent, suddenly smaller than Jasmine had ever seen him. Principal Warren cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss some recent incidents." "Incidents?" Elliot repeated, his gaze locking on Darren Dawson. "Your son humiliated my daughter in front of the entire school cafeteria. He's been harassing her since the moment she arrived. That's not an incident. That's a pattern." Darren leaned back in his chair, lips curling. "Chief Whitfield, let's not exaggerate. Boys will be boys. I'm sure Jasmine misunderstood." Elliot's jaw tightened, but his tone remained cool, controlled. "No, she didn't misunderstand, and your son didn't stop." Trent shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward Jasmine, then down at the floor. The swagger that filled the hallways was gone, replaced with the faint edge of fear. Lauren Dawson broke in, her voice sharp. "You're making this sound worse than it is. Surely your daughter can handle a little teasing. Kids these days are too sensitive." Elliot stepped closer, his badge catching the light again. "My daughter doesn't need to handle abuse. She needs to learn in a school where she's safe. And if Summit Ridge can't provide that, then I will." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Principal Warren shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, Trent spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean—" Elliot cut him off with a look. Not cruel, not harsh, just steady, the kind of look that stripped away excuses. "You meant every bit of it, son, and you need to understand that your loss to name won't shield you from the consequences forever." Jasmine sat quietly, watching. For the first time, she wasn't alone. For the first time, her father's strength filled the room so completely that even Trent Dawson seemed small. The Dawsons exchanged a glance, their certainty wavering. Darren adjusted his tie, his confidence thinning under Elliot's steady calm. Principal Warren finally cleared his throat again. "We'll take disciplinary action. Effective immediately. Elliot nodded once, then rested a hand lightly on Jasmine's shoulder. Good, because my daughter deserves better than this. As they left the office, Jasmine glanced back once. Trent's eyes met hers. The smirk that had haunted her every step was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar, fear. And that was the beginning of the shift. The cafeteria was louder than usual that Thursday, buzzing with leftover gossip from the meeting that only a few had been unlucky enough to witness. Whispers slipped between tables like wildfire. Chief Whitfield came to school. He went head-to-head with the Dawsons. Trent got dragged in front of everyone. No one knew all the details, but the rumor was enough to shake the ground under Summit Ridge's golden boy. Trent Dawson sat in the center of it all, his tray untouched, his smirk strained. His friends still circled him, but the laughter was thinner now, the loyalty fraying at the edges. He could feel it, the way their eyes darted when he spoke, the hesitation in their laughter. Power, he realized, was fragile. It only held if everyone believed in it. And after that meeting, belief in him had cracked. He needed to fix it. He needed to make a show. When Jasmine entered the cafeteria, balancing her tray with quiet poise, Trent's stomach twisted. She walked straighter now, chin lifted, her silence no longer shrinking but steady, defiant. Students watched her differently, some with curiosity, some with respect. And that way passing is something Trent could not allow. He stood, every step deliberate, every movement meant to draw attention back where it belonged. On him. By the time he reached Jasmine's table, the room had stilled, waiting. "Well, look who thinks she's special now," Trent drawled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Daddy comes to school one time and suddenly you think you run the place?" Jasmine looked up, her gaze calm, unflinching. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. Trent leaned closer, sneering. "Newsflash, Whitfield. You're still nobody here. You're still Mr. Dawson." The voice cut through the cafeteria like a blade. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, framed by the harsh fluorescent lights, was Elliot Whitfield. Still in uniform. Still carrying himself with the kind of presence that filled every corner of the room. A teacher rushed to his side, flustered. "Chief Whitfield, I didn't realize—" "Just here to have lunch with my daughter," Elliot said, his tone calm but commanding, his eyes locked on Trent. Steady, unreadable. "Problem with that?" The cafeteria was silent. Even the air seemed to still. Trent's mouth opened, then closed. His smirk was gone, his confidence crumbling in front of the dozens of students now watching not him, but Jasmine. A whisper rippled across the room. "Chief Whitfield? Wait, that's her dad?" Heads turned, eyes widened. The truth spread like wildfire. The quiet new girl wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of the man who now held more authority in Summit Ridge than anyone else. Jasmine rose from her seat slowly, the corner of her mouth lifting in the faintest hint of a smile. Not gloating, not mocking, just steady, proud. "Come on, Dad," she said softly. "Let's eat." Elliot placed a protective hand on her shoulder, guiding her past Trent, who stood frozen, his face pale. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted so completely that there was no question who stood taller. The whispers grew louder. Some students smiled at Jasmine as she walked by. Others simply stared. But no one laughed. No one dared. And Trent Dawson, once untouchable, sat down at his table with his head lowered, the cafeteria buzzing with the truth that stripped him of his crown. Jasmine didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence of her victory said more than words ever could. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like an outsider. She felt seen, not just because of her father's badge, but because she had carried herself through humiliation, silence, and fire, and had come out standing taller than the boy who tried to break her. And Trent Dawson would never forget it.